a warm-ups topic because I think we now have your topic, which is an Australian government attempts to sanctify religious discrimination.
I'm in danger. I kind of want to apologize in advance for this one. I tried my best, but this turned out to be a very complicated topic, and I've been struggling to focus lately. And so I kind of just had to cobble this together in about a day and a half. So it's going to be very incomplete and a bit of a mess that I did work really hard to make sure that none of the things I say are incorrect. So hopefully I managed that. But yes, the Australian federal government almost passed a bill which would legalize religiously motivated discrimination. And to understand why, we have to go back to 2017, which is a bit before my time. I only just turned 18 in time to vote in the glorified opinion poll we had on whether or not Australians think the government should legalize same-sex marriage. That poll, of course, showed overwhelming support, with almost two-thirds of Australians in favour, which left some bigots worried that their bigotry would not be legally protected and enabled anymore. And in fact, a huge part of the debate surrounding the decision was Conservatives insisting that the bill should have special provisions and exemptions giving religious people the rights to openly discriminate against same-sex couples. So you have all of these conservative Christians who are very anxious. Of course, the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, decided to try to appease them by appointing Philip Ruddock, a known opponent of LGBT rights, who went out of his way to deny individual Australians very basic rights. Appointed him to conduct a religious freedom review to make sure that we had an appropriate amount of religious freedom. And unsurprisingly, it was fine. There wasn't really a huge issue. But of course, Conservatives really wanted to have these special protections. So the following year, Scott Morrison promised to introduce a Religious Discrimination Act, which has become our Religious Discrimination Bill 2022. They've been at this for a while. This bill is allegedly designed to provide people of faith protections that they don't have, that they should, and put the anti-discrimination law for religion in line with other anti-discrimination law. And of course, it doesn't. Now, you may be thinking this is entirely a false flag. It's not quite. There are actually gaps in the law. There are protections that are not there that should be there for religious people. But interestingly, the Australian Human Rights Commission has been supporting filling these gaps for more than 20 years, which is a very long time before 2017. So, it's almost as if this is motivated by homophobia, not a genuine concern for religious people. Who would have known? Who would have guessed? So I can't go into all of the problems with this bill because there's actually 3 bills and there have been 3 different drafts over the past several years, and I just did not have time to research all of it, but a few things did catch my eye. Ironically, the bill legalizes religious discrimination, even against religious people. Religious bodies are exempt from engaging in discrimination as long as the discrimination is in accordance with the doctrines, tenets, beliefs, or teachings of the religion, is in good faith, is intended to avoid injury to the religious susceptibilities of adherents of the same religion, and is outlined in a written and publicly available policy. So, for example, and this is one of the things that they were explicitly fighting for with this bill, a school could require all students and staff to practice a particular religion. So that means that members of more marginalized religions would, members of more marginalized religions and atheists would have limited work opportunities. If you live in an area where the majority of the schools are Catholic and you are a Muslim and you want to be a teacher, well, you're out of luck. And the school could also require students and staff to, for example, identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. There was a recent controversy, in fact, Cedar Point Christian College, I believe, just dropped this sexuality contract on parents, saying that they and their children attending the school had to oppose homosexuality and identify with their birth gender, their birth assigned gender. And that could be protected under federal anti-discrimination law if this bill gets passed. This bill also overrides Commonwealth, state, and territory anti-discrimination laws, meaning that this bill could be an avenue to discriminate if the religious exemptions are ever removed from the Sex Discrimination Act. By the way, that's a thing. The Sex Discrimination Act has a bunch of exemptions for religious discrimination already. We already had laws allowing religious people to discriminate, and they want more of them. So yeah, that's nice. The bill also protects statements of belief as long as these statements aren't accompanied by discriminatory conduct. For example, and this example comes straight from the Australian Human Rights Commission, it's not just something I'm guessing at, an employer who tells a pregnant woman that there is no room in this business for someone who is going to be a single mother may be protected as long as he doesn't actually fire the woman. So based on what I've been reading, I'm guessing this could apply to all sorts of bigoted statements of belief. I've already read concerns about doctors expressing disgust with queer patients. You could say as a statement of belief, in accordance with your religion, that you think two women or two men shouldn't be able to raise a child, that you think someone shouldn't be able to change their sex. And you could just make things really awful for queer people who are seeking healthcare or trying to attend school or in an aged care facility. Of course, it's really difficult to say for sure because at least the third draft of the legislation does say that this doesn't cover statements that are malicious or that a reasonable person would consider would threaten, intimidate, harass, or vilify a person or group. But this is extremely vague and it's really watered down as well. They have like a special clarification on what counts as vilification, and just given what the government is trying to do in passing this in the first place, there's no good reason to think that they wouldn't just let people be nasty and wouldn't just let people bully queer people and women and disabled people and everyone else.
It's just open season for
it is open season. Like they in the bill they have a whole thing where they say that a statement of belief does not in and of itself count as discrimination under like the Sex Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, the I'm sorry, I don't even remember, but there's like 7 different anti-discrimination acts that they're basically saying, these don't apply. Yeah, it's very much just giving religious people and, let's be honest, Christians the right to discriminate. Earlier drafts of the bill were even worse. Some of the provisions were outright deadly, such as the right to conscientious objection for healthcare providers. So healthcare providers would be able to refuse to provide services such as contraception, abortion, or hormone treatment for trans people, etc. And they wouldn't even be obligated to refer patients to another provider who didn't have those objections. So it's the classic religious thing. We've seen this in the US before. I'm getting flashbacks to like discourse around the state of the United States in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
where they think that their religion prohibiting them from doing something means they get to prohibit you from doing something as well.
Yeah.
The bill has at least been shelved indefinitely, uh, in part due to controversy over amendments to protect students from discrimination based on their sexual orientation, but not their gender identity. Because, of course, this bill was much more violent in the first draft, but controversies and opposition have forced conservatives to water it down, water it down, and water it down. And eventually they did concede that, funnily enough, this whole thing was started over hating gay and bisexual people, but eventually they conceded that they would allow protections for gay people, but the new group that they're going after is trans people, and they've said, no, we're not going to protect gender identity. And both Labour and Liberal members of Parliament objected to that. Reminder that the Liberals are our Conservative Party, and that surprised me. I looked into this and thought, is there something going on? And it seems like Liberals just genuinely object to this. Yeah, they backed protections for transgender students, which has caused hard conservatives like the Australian Christian lobby to want to abandon the bill entirely. Because, of course, the bill was about hate. It was never about doing anything to help religious people. So one thing I really want to highlight, because you can find articles everywhere talking about what the bill can do and what this means legally. But I guess what I can bring to the table is I want to talk about the rhetoric that was used when people were arguing for this bill. I read Scott Morrison's second reading speech because I hate myself, apparently, and I couldn't help but realize how extremely bigoted it was. In his speech, he spent some time scaremongering about cancel culture, stating that many people from various religious traditions are concerned about the lack of religious protection against the prevalence of cancel culture in Australian life. It's true, it's there, it's real. Australians shouldn't have to worry about looking over their shoulder, fearful of offending an anonymous person on Twitter, cowardly sitting there, abusing and harassing them for their faith, or transgressing against political and social zeitgeists. This is, of course, appropriating and distorting a term that Black US Americans came up with that belongs to them, effectively making it useless. It's really gross, the disrespect for the Prime Minister of an entire country to just go ahead and do that, I think. Morrison also pays lip service to members of marginalized religions, such as Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, Baha'is, and Buddhists, to make his bill seem inclusive and multicultural, even though it's only made with Christians in mind. And you can see this when you look at the speeches of other members of parliament who are a bit less tactful. They're very clearly only thinking about Christians. But they talk about, a Muslim man should be able to keep a prayer mat in his drawer. So people should be allowed to wear turbans without being discriminated against. And there's nothing in the bill really to help with that. The bill doesn't have any kind of protections against hate speech or hate crimes against religious people. It doesn't have any recognition of what people in more marginalized religions go through. It's just about Christians and kind of giving them the right to discriminate. And Morrison,
other religious groups.
In particular, Morrison exploits and appropriates Jewish suffering and anti-Semitism, stating that, sadly, every age faces its share of bigotry against people of faith. The treasurer and his colleagues sadly know too much about this in their own personal lives and in their own communities. I particularly acknowledge all those of the Jewish faith. It is a great shame that the treasurer of our country has to be offered close personal protection, not because he is the treasurer, but because he is a Jew. Again, the religious discrimination bill doesn't actually seem to address this in any way. In fact, by giving religious entities so much power to discriminate, it's giving Christians a license to be nasty to these more marginalized people. So it's just horrible for Morrison to act like
Especially with like the inclusion that like it has to be made clear in policy somewhere that like, you know, no X group is allowed. It's kind of like you're talking about putting signs in doorways. I know I'm not actually going to do that, but like putting signs in doorways, but in the documentation on like websites and stuff saying no X allowed, like, and you're trying to call upon Jewish people, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, Morrison specifically used the example of, oh, if a Jewish school only wants to employ Jewish staff, if that's their preference, they should be allowed to. What could be fairer than that? But of course, the way this bill is going to work, it's more likely going to be the other way around with, a Catholic school saying Catholics only. No, if you are a Jewish teacher and you want a job here and you're struggling to find work, well, screw you. It's just awful. One thing that really annoyed me personally was during his second reading speech, Mr. Lisa appropriated ableist discrimination because, of course, these people were desperately looking for examples of Christians being oppressed and they couldn't find any because that doesn't happen. And so Mr. Lisa told this story, quote, Christians are increasingly suffering discrimination. In a case brought by the Human Rights Alliance in 2020, a committed Christian was banned from a Canberra cafe for reading the Bible and praying with her friend who has autism. Staff at the cafe saw the two ladies reading the Bible and praying and assumed that the woman with autism was being taken advantage of. When the two women went up to pay, the manager accused the first woman of brainwashing and banned her from the cafe, end quote. And of course, religion is involved there, but this woman wasn't being discriminated against for being a Christian. Her friend was discriminated against for being autistic. This assumption that she was being treated as less than a child. This assumption that not only that she's vulnerable, but that these random strangers had any right to step in and do what they thought was best for her, not knowing her. And Mr. Lisa is completely erasing that degradation and that violence so that he can appropriate that suffering as his own. And he also neglected to mention that this situation was actually resolved. The women, they were protected under 3 pieces of anti-discrimination law, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Religious Anti-Discrimination Act, and also the Disability Discrimination Act. But they decided to take the high road and they simply met up with the cafe owners and explained the situation, kind of just like, hey, hi, no, actually, autistic people are not subhuman. And the cafe owners apologized and they lifted the ban. And so, yeah.
It's almost like they resolved the issue.
Is it good that happened? No, but the issue has been resolved. This woman isn't banned from the cafe anymore. It's almost like the issue isn't her being a Christian.
Yes, yeah. It does show that it's cutting off corners to like, a puzzle piece that like one of those little toy that you like slot in. It's cutting pieces off that to like make it fit into this sort of discrimination. Except you're fucking around with like key parts of people's identities when you do that, and you're actually doing harm and you're erasing actual violence.
It really pissed me off as someone who's been on the receiving end of that kind of thing, who's had to explain to people who should know better, actually, that, no, I'm not subhuman. For someone to just take that and be like, see, I'm oppressed. It's bullshit.
Yeah, and if like if this person, if she was to say anything and like have a go, like they then like treat her like, oh, like, well, I guess you don't want our support then, sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's just awful. They never help when you actually need help, and then like they decide to insert themselves into the conversation in other times. It's just like,
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of doing that violence again, just treating her like an object to fit into whatever narrative he has without consulting her. Yeah, yeah, it's just awful. I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't end up writing in a satisfying ending to this. I kind of just had to put this all together today. The takeaway from this is that this bill is rotten to the core. It's built on lies, and it's just the government trying to give Christians a right to discriminate just for no reason. Something actually that the articles I've been reading talk a lot about is this bill doesn't just have a shield to protect against discrimination, but it also has these swords that allow people to go out and proactively discriminate. And it's just, it's awful. It's such a departure from existing anti-discrimination law. And it's good that it was shelved, but it's really scary that the government tried to do that in the first place.
Yeah. And that sort of thing. The thing is, like, it doesn't even have to pass because, like, marginalized people are always like keyed into the sort of stuff going on, so like they're the ones who are going to be noticing, they're the ones who are going to see how close it gets, and they're the ones who's going to impact like how they feel like they can engage in day-to-day life, going out, getting involved online in politics and everything like that. It has a ripple effect, it's very easy to say, oh, it's shelved now, it's out of mind. It is not out of mind of everyone who like it was going to impact, they remember.
Yeah, it sends a very strong message, and it's going to embolden people. And it's shelved now, but it could rear its ugly head later. And yeah, it really does show how the government feels.
To respond to Ninja Cow's question in the chat, is autist the correct word to use? It is a perfectly acceptable term. So yeah. It depends on personal preference. So
yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that. I was going to say that, but
okay,
distracted. No, you're fine. I just.
So yeah.
It's almost like I have ADHD or something.
Yeah.